Hello everybody, my name is Atanas Politov. I'm very pleased to be here and thanks for the invitation, Andrzej and Oka. So about law, before I start I was thinking I will leave you, this is who we are, so you can read it while I'm talking if you're interested, and you might ask yourself, why are you involved human rights and social justice in pro bono? I'll come back to that, but before that I was thinking, I don't know, I still have some free time, though I have 2 jobs now and I have a 2-year-old son at home who wakes up at 6:25 every single day. The most punctual thing in my life ever. I'm a lawyer and we're not very punctual. But I still have some free time, and then every now and then I'd like to take some courses, and I was always struggling with the fact that online courses, Coursera, TED, things like that, and I was always struggling with the fact that my free time has almost nothing to do with my work. There is nothing about social justice or human rights or NGOs and law, let alone. And I'm always trying to find out some connection. So yesterday I was listening to this, I'm taking a course on music and history of music, and I was listening to this lecture on Robert and Clara Schumann, the great composers of early 19th century, early mid-19th century. And there, the lecturer, Yale University, so the lecturer was saying how when they met, there's still 10 years difference between them, and then when they met and they got married, Clara was 20 and Robert was 30. And Clara was actually the much more famous and accomplished pianist and even composer at that point, and Robert was just starting in a way, though he already had a lot of stuff, but he was not that famous as her. And 15 years later, Clara had 8 children, and Robert was and became one of the world's most famous composers. Clara has left some compositions behind, but very little of that. So I started thinking, well, women's rights, 19th century probably would have been quite different if it was 21st century, but something completely different struck me. At that point, the lecturer said before he met Clara, Robert Schumann went to Heidelberg University, probably the place to go at that point throughout Europe, to study law. And then I was like, wow, one of us, another lawyer who made it. But turns out, he said, Robert Schumann spent 1 year at Heidelberg Law School, and he achieved something that no one has ever achieved before and maybe after. He didn't attend a single lecture in the whole year. So that was a bit of a disappointment. But then, then I started thinking, well, but the thing is that many of us did attend law lectures, and many of us became lawyers. So what happens though, and I was thinking, not anymore, I hit 40 already, so they don't ask me that, but until 5-10 years ago, everybody was asking, why are you a lawyer? Why are you a lawyer? And I at some point, I completely got fed up of giving all the, traditional, I believe in justice, I believe in social justice, or, law is important. And I started saying and believing in it because, I have no talent. I had no talents whatsoever, so I went to study law. And then Robert Schumann, he had a talent, and he didn't. But something very, very interesting is happening in law schools throughout the world. For most of us, most lawyers, if not all of us, at some point in Europe and elsewhere, 5 years in the States, 3 years, by the end of it, all lawyers believe that we're extremely important and we have some super, super special talent. That society cannot function without us, and will completely collapse if there are no lawyers and there is no law. That the law, and you have to be serious about it, there is some truth in it, that the law is one of the golden threads that holds things together. So when Andrzej actually suggested, it's not here, but suggested the subject of my presentation, the legal pro bono, and I was like, well, pro bono is, of course, legal pro bono. It's Latin. The full is pro bono publico. It comes from Roman law. Probably the KPMG of the Roman Empire was also doing volunteer work, but it comes from Roman law. It's a legal Latin expression. And of course, it's law. So when he suggested credo of pro bono, I was like, of course, I don't have to say it. It is. But then we started thinking, and when you talk to lawyers. This is what we're doing, but when we talk to lawyers, another interesting thing happens, and that is that especially in Europe, but also elsewhere. I have projects in Nigeria, and we have offices in China and Hong Kong and Russia and New York. And most lawyers, if not all lawyers, will tell you, well, we all do pro bono work. You know, all lawyers do pro bono work. The grocery shop owner on the corner, the uncle, we all do some legal work for free, for friends that we have, for people that we know, for people that come. So what is different right now? And then why are we doing this? Why are we doing the connections? We do operate what we call clearinghouses, which comes obviously from the business world, brokerage between the non-profit world and the legal world. And as you all know, probably the difference is partially this, and many others, that the globalization, especially of the legal market, from our perspective, but certainly also of the businesses, has brought huge international or local law firms and businesses who have legal departments. And they probably don't have that connection to the world anymore, to the non-profit world, to the world of the streets and the different. As I always say, we go to different. Many of you are from non-profits here, many of you are from businesses, so it's a great place to be together. But you know, we go to different restaurants, we go to different cafes, and even if we go to the same restaurant, we wouldn't talk about it. In other words, probably no NGO or very few non-profits will come to this building, for example, or to where the law firms are, or where the law firms are in Rome or in London, the big law firms, who have thousands of lawyers sometimes, and knock on your door, knock on their door and say, can you do this for free? So we realized that, we started figuring this about 2005 and 2006 here in Budapest. We opened our office in Budapest where we do all of our work for Europe in 2001. So it took us 4 or 5 years. And then we decided that we have to be the matchmaker. And when we started doing that, we hired a lawyer, a Hungarian lawyer who is still with us, unfortunately, Tamás Barabás, he's here, to do the matchmaking, Hungarian NGOs, Hungarian legal needs, and Hungarian lawyers. So our assumption, we have 2 assumptions. One is that NGOs have a lot of legal needs. They cannot pay for lawyers. They don't have enough money, and that's true. And the second assumption is that, well, we know we are a non-profit, we're an NGO, we know the NGO world, so let's go and find these crazy lawyers who will do it for free. Wrong. 10 years later, you can talk to Tash, probably he spent 75–80% of his time to go to talk to non-profits and to NGOs and explain to them why this is important. Here is the list of our current, in Hungary only, current collaborators. So you would see there's several companies, GE is there, HB Europe is there, HP, but the rest are law firms. They're American and British law firms. Mostly some of them are local law firms. Most of them are, no, all of them actually are Hungarian lawyers working for those law firms. And they do pro bono work. So what we decided to do is to institutionalize it. Somebody used that expression earlier today, the institutionalization of pro bono, which has certain negative connotations. It's not that, but it's important because once you organize it and do it for them, then you get to this. So we run pro bono clearing houses, not just in Hungary, but where we have offices, Russia, China, Hong Kong, London, we have an office, we have a global forum. So these are just some numbers from our 2013 report. The 2014 is still not ready. To illustrate the work in 61 law firms and companies, some companies with bigger legal departments. These are those that actually took work from. There are much more of them that are those that are happy because they saw that they cannot do it, that they saw the opportunity not to do pro bono. They received the opportunities from us, but they didn't do it. But much more are engaged. Here are some examples of what we call human rights. You can think of it of social justice, social programs, non-profit world, of the type of work that we do, or rather the subject areas, and you can see it's throughout. So if, I guess if Clara Schumann was alive, he could have called us and asked for some support at some point. Some examples, some more specific examples to illustrate the point. So the first one, are you here, Humus? No. Yes? Oh, okay. So the first one is actually an example of where the lawyers, the corporate business lawyers, are doing work for the non-profit for what we call the corporate legal needs. So any non-profit, just like any organization, it doesn't matter if you're a profit or not. You have your own legal needs. So you see labor contracts, labor law, data protection, intellectual property, even some business transactions where it's needed. Non-profits, at least here in Hungary and many European countries, could do some profit work for-profit work, but it's regulated. So this is an example where pro bono, for free, a law firm is supporting this, and it amounts for hundreds of hours of legal work. Because often what happens to us is that we go to a non-profit, to an NGO, and we say, so when was the last time your labor contracts were drafted or redrafted or done? And then sometimes you get an answer, well, there was some intern in 1997 or something, or never. You know, so it happens a lot, and all my life I work for a non-profit, so I'm not, you know, it's not a negative thing that I say, that's what happens. We're all very busy, we have limited resources, and we don't pay attention to law for the most part, unless it hits you, unless there's a problem. So we're trying to prevent that. Another example, almost on the other side of the spectrum. Many of you who are from Hungary would recognize some of these cases. An NGO called Chance for Children, here with 2 lawyers on staff, not even full-time. One of the key human rights NGOs who litigate against school segregation for Roma families. So they won a case. They won a case that says, according to the European directives and the Hungarian law, school cannot be segregated. You cannot have separate schools for Roma and for Hungarian. Roma and Hungarians, whoever you want to, how to call it, but you cannot have that. Then we had a discussion with them in our office and said, well, maybe some of these families have compensation claims, the right to ask for compensation. We're only 2 lawyers, we're human rights lawyers, we're not going to engage into that. So we talked to several law firms, and one of them, Hungary, one of their lawyers, took the case, lost the first instance, lost the second instance, and won 5 years later at the Supreme Court, now called Curia. And it's an incredible thing because on the face, I'm not going to go to the legal aspects of it, but legally for continental Europe, it's amazing that this case was won, that it's not in the States, but I'm not going to go into details there. But a group of, I think at the end there were 5 Roma families who got high quality legal representation, advice and support from top lawyers in Budapest, in the capital city, for free. And actually the highest court in the country delivered justice for them. So, and I said 5 years, they stayed on the case. It would have probably impossible to do that if it was not a large law firm who can sit and sustain on it and do it for free and sit on the case for it was 5 years, right? 5.5 years. Sit on if it were solo practitioners, smaller offices, or if the NGO let alone that's impossible, the families would have to pay for it. So it's a good example. And the last point is now there are more cases coming up. Law has changed, certain situations have changed, and a group of 5 lawyers, some of them solo practitioners, some of them from the big law firms, actually joined the litigation department. And a very brief case from our Russia clearinghouse, an NGO that works for children with cancer, a case where an example where they wanted to change the Russian legislation has been very limited, or rather restrictive is the word, and they wanted to, by the way, we should never use the word lobby, that's our pro bono lawyers tell us, advocate for change, let's put it this way. They did research throughout the Russian regions, put a memo for them, and supported their lobbying campaign. So the second thing we do is that we run these 4 or 5 clearinghouses on our own, but we believe that in order for legal pro bono to flourish, it has to grow, at least in Europe and elsewhere. So we engaged in supporting local NGOs, partners, clearinghouses, with whatever we can throughout different countries. And you see how from 2006 we started with 1, Hungary, and 2013 there are 30 and they're growing. And right now more than 15 continental European jurisdictions have domestic pro bono, legal pro bono matchmakers, clearinghouses. And we do run a network, meeting regularly, have websites, support each other. I won't go into the details, but it's extremely important. We produced a manual on how to develop a pro bono clearinghouse. This is interesting. It's very helpful when you have offices in America, United States, Russia, China, because then you cover like 1/3 of the world in a map, though it's only like 5 people working in those offices. And then we have a partner in Brazil, and then we just miss India. We have India too, so, well, there you go. Half of the world is ours. Now, the third thing we do, is that we also run convenings, big forums. And in fact, the European Pro Bono Forum, the one in the middle, as you can see, it's in its 9th year. The first 3 years was here in Budapest between 2007 and 2009. And then we started moving this powerful mechanism of promoting pro bono, of putting people together, of connecting people throughout Europe. We were in Paris, Madrid, last year in London, Berlin before that, and this time we'll be in Rome. So come, if you're interested, come and join us in Rome in November. Rome in November, they told the Italian lawyers told us to bring our sunglasses, so you know it sounds good. Our second Asia Pro Bono Forum will be in Bangkok this year too, and for the first time we'll do a forum of the Americas in Sao Paulo in Brazil. So finally, what can we do together? I won't go through all the buzzwords, though I really like this slide. If you're a non-profit, call us, email us, call Tamas, me, email us, it doesn't matter. You can just email us with a very simple one line or half a sentence of saying, I need a lawyer because of this, and we'll take it from there, we'll work with you to develop it. If you're a law firm, it's pretty clear, call us. If you're a company, most likely you have legal departments that would probably also would want to get engaged. We know very well, we work with a lot of companies, know very well that your legal departments, even of the biggest companies, are not so big, actually. So what we do is that we team them up with law firms, with big law firms, and believe me, they love it, you know. So they want to work with you, you're their clients, for the most part. And the end result is really, really good. For everybody else who is not a lawyer and doesn't do pro bono, and we're having discussions with Andras and Oka, and the Taproot Foundation here is a fantastic example, obviously, from the United States for a multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary approach. We would like to work with you, because obviously when we meet a nonprofit, and I'll end up with that, when we meet somebody in business terms, a pro bono client, an NGO, and when we finally go through the skepticism, why would they help us and everything else, and they trust the process or trust us and the future pro bono lawyers, and they say these are our problems, one part of it is legal, most of it is not. And we can't help beyond that. So we can help with the lawyers, but a lot of it is not for lawyers, but for many other people, IT experts, and I mean the examples from previous presentations from Jenny were there. So I'll end up with that, and thank you very much, and see you in Rome.
Thank you very much. So again, we have a few minutes for questions. I hope you're happy to take them. Van egy pár percünk kérdésekre, és itt van változatlanul a mozgó mikrofonunk, úgyhogy kérem, hogy tegye fel a kezét, aki kérdezni szeretne. And while we're waiting for questions, I have one myself. Your organization you described as a matchmaker, but to what extent do you also work as a bit of a gatekeeper to help companies field requests and not get inundated themselves?
Well, if I understand your question, well, gatekeeper in more of a negative term, that we are holding the resource, or?
Not holding the resource, but I imagine that possibly could be a problem for some companies, that if they get approached by too many people themselves and they don't know how to tell the difference, they don't really want to have the human resources to make decisions and evaluate and assess those requests. And therefore, you know, your role as well as matchmaker is just to make it easier for the company, because they can say whenever someone approaches them for this kind of work, well, we don't deal with this ourselves, please go and approach so-and-so at Pillnet.
Yes, it automatically works that way for us, actually, because the way the system is set up is that we receive all the, or develop together with the non-profits, all the pro bono opportunities, all the pro bono, the legal needs from the perspective of the non-profit. And then we send once or twice a month a list of pro bono opportunities to the law firms and the companies that want to receive it. And they pick and choose. It's volunteer work. So if they don't want to take a case, they don't call on it. And we're not going to push it on them. So from that perspective, they to some extent manage their own time and their taking. Sometimes we do ask people to join, but again, it's volunteer work. So from that perspective, yes, we are gatekeeper. We do screening and vetting of nonprofits a lot, which is something that law firms and companies really appreciate. They do their own work, of course, their own conflict checks and everything. but we do a lot of screening and vetting, and from that perspective, take a lot of work away from the companies and from the firms, because we go through their websites, read reports, talk to their donors, their peers. So from that perspective, yes.
András has a question.
Yeah.
I have two questions. Is legal pro bono possible in Hungary? Is there some obstacle or barriers? And what's your experiences with the smaller firms, not the big ones, but really like local Hungarian legal firms? What are they doing?
Tamás, do you want to take that? Legal pro bono is possible in Hungary, yes. So we're working with a huge number of law firms, as you can see, and they're doing fantastic work. So from that perspective, yes, legally there are no barriers. There could be certain barriers, but it's not prohibited. We work with the Hungarian and the Budapest Bar Association, the gatekeepers of the legal profession. In fact, one of the photos that you saw was from our recent award ceremony. Every year, together with the Hungarian Bar, we're doing an annual pro bono award as part of the annual Lawyers Awards. And then you saw a photo from this year, so which is very important also. I didn't go into the details. There are a lot of details that I didn't want to mention here, that, for example, we strategically chose from the beginning not to work with individuals as clients for a variety of reasons. One of them is the gatekeepers. You didn't want to open the floodgates, but actually a very specific one for the legal profession is that we didn't want to fight with the existing state-provided free legal aid system, where many individual lawyers are being paid by the state to do work for poor people. So we work with non-profits as clients and support them, and then sometimes, as in the case, for example, with the Roma case, it results in help for their own, the people that they work for. Tamás, for the second question?
In English or in Hungarian? Maybe I say, hogy vállalati jogtanácsosoknál ugye ez problémás Magyarországon. So corporate counsels, that's a problem. So that's why we pair them up with lawyers, attorneys. So, hogy vállalati jogtanácsosokat általában ügyvédi irodákkal párban, vagy nem is vállalati jogtanácsosokat, hanem a cégeket, azokat ügyvédi irodákkal együtt bátorítjuk a pro bonóra. Mert ugye itt felelősségbiztosítás egyéb okok miatt ez egy olyan biztonságosabb terület, hiszen a jogtanácsos ő alkalmazottja a cégnek, és nem adhat tanácsot másnak a cégen kívül. Szóval ez egy kicsit trükkös szituáció. A másik pedig, hát a kisebb ügyvédirodák pedig tanulnak a nagyoktól, a nagy nemzetközi irodáktól, azt a know-how-t, azt a szervezeti kultúrát, azt szépen beépítik a világukba. És hogyha 2005-ben bepötyögted a Google-on, hogy pro bono, vagy pro bono ügyvéd, akkor kijött egy sem, nem volt találat. Most, ha bepötyögöd, akkor már kis és közepes irodák is kijönnek a keresésre. Vagy a Google lett jobb, vagy több pro bono.
To what extent is it ever a problem if a certain case would involve going against the state? Do most legal firms take those kinds of cases?
Actually, most wouldn't. Actually, there's even bigger conflicts, not with the state, but with some of the bigger companies that are clients, like pharmaceutical companies and many others. But the beauty of it is that when we have more than Hungary 2025, globally 60-65 law firms, there is always at least one that doesn't have a conflict and would actually even be supportive and happy to take it on. So rarely, I can't even think of the last couple of years of a case, and some of them are going against the state or against big companies, multinationals, and you name it, oil and gas, and NGOs do a lot of advocacy work, a lot of human rights work from that perspective, and we would always, with few exceptions, we would always be able to find a law firm. Again, when it's one of 60 or one of 100, that's a good chance that we're going to be able to do that. Yep.
És egy újabb kérdés?
István from KPMG. In Hungary, I think this model is brilliant, and I think we should have one in Hungary as well, not only in human rights but also in other pro bono fields. And if it's possible to share the business model, what could you share with us? Because I think this is always the key question in Hungary. So there are many good ideas, many stakeholders have the same interest, but the funding and how does it operate and how is it sustainable is always the question.
Oh, there's so many questions here. Well, first, just to clarify it, as I mentioned, this is a Hungarian project in Hungary. Tamás is running it. It's not just for human rights. You know, we work with non-profits throughout the spectrum, arts and culture foundations, and many others. Also from the perspective of like KPMG, for example, we work both with companies and law firms here in Hungary. The business model is relatively simple. One lawyer, Tamás, and his salary in Hungary, who is doing the work. From the perspective of law firms and companies, of the providers, of the legal service providers, basically we need two things. And we started meeting, the first time we started meeting with the big law firms in the city was 2006. And we asked them for two things. One is to meet with the management, like the managing partner in a law firm or a CEO, or people responsible for it. Things have changed already, so there are people responsible for CSR, so you don't have to meet with the CEO. Because we would need it to get the buy-in from as top as possible for the entire company and the law firm. And the second thing we asked them, actually three things. The second thing we asked them is to nominate one person responsible for it. And for the most part, again, that's 2006, so for the most part, that's already done. But we need one person to be responsible for it on behalf of the firm. And the third thing is to accept our email of list of pro bono opportunities. We didn't require any membership fee. We didn't require any minimum of cases per year, nothing like that. Now, having said that, your second part of your question, the funding, is always a big question for any nonprofit. We have a variety of funding sources because pro bono is one of the many programs that we do. So we have funding from private foundations, European Union, for different projects. At the first part of the first slide, training and fellowships that we run for human rights lawyers. But we do ask once a year all the law firms and companies that we work with for voluntary contribution. It is based on certain, there is a list of things that we offer against it, like visibility at our forums and our websites and many other things. But it is again a voluntary contribution. We don't like the membership fee. Some of our partners in other countries do have a membership fee. We don't like it much because then it limits the pro bono world only to those that pay. And as with the question from Andres, the smaller firms with 5-6 lawyers, smaller in number, or 10 lawyers, they probably can't afford the same fees as bigger law firms, but they should have the opportunity to do pro bono work because that's what we believe in. So we try to manage. It's not always the most successful thing in the world, but we try to manage that with diversifying of our fundraising portfolio and our donors as much as possible.
Thank you.